everybody, welcome to today's tutorial. So today we're going to be doing two tutorials based on a different theme. We're going to be looking at camera tracking today. So we'll have already talked about this in the session, but just for those people who are recapping at the moment, if you're trying to sort of get the difference between camera tracking and motion tracking is when we're actually tracking an object within our scene. So our camera could be completely stationary, locked off on a tripod. The object is moving through the scene, we're tracking that movement. Camera tracking, on the other hand, is where we use After Effects to track, try and predict what it thinks the camera that filmed the scene has done. And then what After Effects does is it creates a virtual camera inside of After Effects which mimics the movement of the original camera. So that when we add new assets into After Effects, they should move and operate as though they were being filmed by the original camera, as though they're part of that original scene. So that's what we're going to be doing today, is tracking that camera movement. Okay, and there's kind of two different flavors that we can use for that. So we're going to just jump into the first one, and the second one's a bit more kind of advanced a bit later on. Basically, one is about building a 3D space and then putting assets into a 3D space, and the other is about actually attaching assets to the tracking data that we've created, and that's what we're going to do first. So here's our corridor footage that we've got for the first tutorial, and what we're going to do is we're going to pick it up and drop it down onto this symbol. If you remember, that's the one that creates the new composition with the same settings as the original footage, so it's 30 frames per second, 4K, whatever it might be. Okay, so here's our footage then. So we can just play that through, and we can see that it's just a nice basic walk along a corridor, so a nice sort of simple shot. Okay, and what we're going to be doing is tracking the movement of the camera as I've walked through this footage, okay, so that we can then add assets to the scene. So the way we're going to do this is we're going to come to our tracker. So if you can't see your tracker, remember you go up to Window and make sure that tracker is ticked. If it isn't, tick it. If it is ticked, it's hidden somewhere, so it'll be in one of these like panels. So just click these chevrons and just keep checking until you find your tracker, and once you've found it, you can pick it up and you can dock it wherever you like. Okay, like so. So once you've got your tracker, then make sure your footage is highlighted, and you just need to click Track Camera. And what it's going to do now is, if we come up to, here's your Project tab, if you come up to your Effect Controls tab, you should see 3D Camera Tracker effect has now been applied to this clip. Okay, and at the moment it's initializing, but in a minute it'll go, right, okay, I'm ready now, and then it'll start actually tracking the footage, and it'll show you like how many frames it's got left to do and also how long it's got left to do. So there we go, so we're at 0% at the moment, tracking frame 1 at 441. In a moment it'll start going, and then it'll tell me how much longer it's got to go. Yeah, there we go. So I will, you can, if you want to, you can click Advanced and you can turn off the hide warning banner like that, okay, so you can carry on working, but I'm just going to leave it up, and I'm going to wind this video on and come back to you when it's finished. So there we go then. So it's now finished analysing all those frames, and it's now creating, well, solving the camera that it's tracked, okay. So as I say, you can carry on working by doing this if you click Advanced and then Hide Warning Banner, although it's already gone. So what you'll find then is, once you've tracked your camera, you'll start finding these nodes attached to bits of the scene. Okay. However, at the moment, After Effects is getting a bit confused because there's this bloke in the scene. He's walking through, and of course he's a moving object, so After Effects doesn't know what it's looking at, and it doesn't know what he is. All it knows is that he's moving independently of everything else, so it assumes that he's closer because he's moving faster. It assumes that he's closer to us than everything else. Okay, and of course he isn't, he's far away. So what you want to do whenever you're doing anything to do with 3D camera tracking, you've got to try and make sure you don't track moving objects, because if you do, then that's going to totally mess up your track, because After Effects is going to take that into account and it's going to assume that that's part of the overall movement of the camera, which of course it isn't. So what you do is you click on this node which is on him, okay, and we just hit backspace, and then it will go, oh yeah, okay, you don't want that one, I'll solve this camera. And now that he's been taken out of the equation, what you'll find is when it finishes solving the camera, it will now be able to actually make sense of the scene. So the nodes on the closer parts of the scene will be bigger. There we go. So these are bigger. So it's telling us, yeah, I've worked out that these are closer now. So it was him that was messing everything up. Now we've got rid of him. it's going, yeah, no, I get it now. These are closer, these are further away, this little one over here is further away again, and so on and so on. So I get it now. I can see the perspective. Okay, and that's really cool, because what it now means is that between these three different points, After Effects is now able to triangulate between three different positions to find various planes. So there's the floor plane there, or you can find a plane on the wall maybe here. Do you see what I mean? And it's starting to kind of figure it out. Now, realistically, those 2 points are going to be further indented into the wall than the edge of this frame, so it's not perfectly accurate, but it's it's good enough for our purposes, because we can always fettle it later on. So what you can do is you can either select nodes that you particularly want to use. So you could sort of go, I'm going to this one, and then hold down Shift, and you could go this one and this one, let's say, to create that very specific plane, because these are all on top of the skirting board, so I know that's the one I want. But you can also just allow it to find its own planes and kind of judge based on, by eye, that sort of thing. Okay, so what we're going to do then is we're going to click on a plane once we've found one that we like. So that looks good to me, so I'm going to click on that. And that's triangulated between these 3 points, all of which are on top of a skirting board. So it's not going to be quite at the level of the floor, but it'll do for our purposes. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click on that. And the first time you create something in a 3D tracked project, it'll say create whatever and camera. Okay. Now, you could just click create camera over here, and that's what we'll be doing in the second tutorial. But in this one, we're going to be creating a solid and attaching something that we want to that solid, so it should move in relation to the actual movement of the frame. Okay, so I'm going to create solid and camera, and so now if we play the footage through, we can see that solid that it's just created, this purple placeholder, is moving pretty well in relation to the track. If we want to be very clear about this, a nice tip is to highlight track solid like so, and I'm going to rotate it around a little bit so that it kind of matches the lines of the composition. I'm going to scale it, or I'll move it that way first, scale it up, oops, like so. I'm going to scale it to the floor like that. Okay, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over to the effects and presets, and I'm just going to type in grid. And if you pick up grid, you can drop it onto that effect, and now you've got a nice grid on the floor, and we can kind of look at it and go, yeah, does that kind of match the movement of the scene? It kind of gets the perspective right. It's all looking pretty good, isn't it? The perspective of this grid is kind of matching the lines of the corridor pretty well, and it's all moving. It's not floating away or doing anything independently of the movement of the camera. So yeah, it's all looking good. I'm not going to keep that though. I'm just going to take that back to where it was. Okay, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click on this solid, and I'm going to go down to pre-compose. So if we remember what that is, it basically means that we're nesting another composition inside this bigger composition that we're producing, and that allows us to make changes to it, and it will then run this second composition as part of the bigger one. Okay, so I'm going to call this floor logo like so, and I'm going to click OK. So now what I can do is I can double click on this floor logo here, and now I can alter the properties of this layer, okay, because this layer is now a composition. So I'm going to go back to my project tab up here, and I'm going to go to my course logo, and I'm going to drag this down on the top, and then I'm just going to click on track solid and hit backspace, because I'm just going to get rid of it. I don't need it. Now then, if I open up the transform controls here and I can scale this down, you can see that because my logo is on a square format, it fits quite nicely within this square, so I'm just going to keep it like that. However, if I wanted to do something else, like adding, let's say, standard 1920 by 1080 footage, for example, what I can do, because this is a composition now, I can click on composition settings, and I can just go to width, and I can go 1920 and height 1080, like so, click OK, and now I've got a nice 1920 by 1080 aspect ratio, which I can put video into or whatever it might be. Okay, but I don't want that because it's square, so I'm just going to keep it nice and square. Okay, now we've added the course logo to this composition, and if we click back to corridor footage, lo and behold, there it is. Okay, so we can go into the properties of that, go into transform, for example, and I can scale this up like that. That's looking pretty good. okay? And I can move along and I can say, yeah, that's not bad. The only thing is, as we know, it was a little bit above the floor. So just to make it look a bit better, I'm just going to push that down onto the floor a bit more, just so that it's sort of, it moves more in relation to the floor rather than, you know, like a few inches above it. Okay, yeah, that's not looking too bad. Right. Other than that, though, it's looking pretty good. I think the angles are looking all right. So the other thing, though, is if we play this through, we're going to sort of see that, yeah, while it kind of moves now with the track, we've also got to finish it off because it just looks a bit plonk, doesn't it? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back here. And instead of altering that image now, because it's a pre-comp, I can go into this composition and I can do all my changes in here. So what I'm going to do is course logo, and I'm going to go into effect, and I'm going to go into keying and color range. So if I open up the effect controls tab here, I can take this first dropper and I can say, right, get rid of all this white background, which it's done, most of it. However, I also used a slight sort of different, very light grey just to give it a bit of depth when I made this logo. So I'm also going to click plus and go get rid of that white and also this color here. And so now it's got rid of all that background. We've just got the logo on a transparent background, which is what we call an alpha channel. And now in the corridor, we now don't have that white background any longer. We just have the nice course logo. And if we move along, we can kind of see it roughly looks okay. It's moving ever so slightly independently of the floor, isn't it? But I think it's roughly looking all right. We can move that down just a little bit more, maybe. Okay, so, but it still looks a bit plonk, doesn't it, to me? So the next thing we want to do is, once we've kind of added an asset into the scene, if we actually want it to look like it's in the scene, then we also need to kind of make changes to it in terms of the color grading of it, possibly even the shadows of it. We can look at that later on, you know, in a more kind of in-depth tutorial when we start looking at creating light sources in After Effects and making objects cast shadows and things like that. No, but for now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to click this toggle switches and modes button until I find this mode, this blend mode here. I'm going to select that blend mode from normal, and I'm going to select something like soft light, for example. And soft light is just going to make it look as though it's illuminated by a nice soft kind of light source, and it's a bit transparent. So basically what it means is it's sort of blending into the floor a bit more. There we go. That doesn't look too bad. As we're moving along, it does still look as though it's moving ever so slightly independently. I wonder if I've moved it down a bit too far. There we go. Perhaps try moving it back up again. That's better. That's it. So what I'd done there is I'd moved it down too far, so it was actually below. If it was in real life, it would be below the level of the floor, and so it's kind of moving independently of the floor, if you see what I mean. So the key is just to find that point, because the points we triangulated were on the top of this skirting board. Effectively, the logo is floating at the height of the skirting board. So by pushing it down, so obviously that's going to move ever so slightly differently to the floor, just because it's marginally closer to the camera. So by pushing it down slightly in the Z space, like that, I can just, like so, I can just make it look a bit more like it's actually part of the scene. Okay. That's okay. I mean, you know, it would still benefit from a little bit of tinkering. I can also do things like I could change the opacity if I wanted to make it look a bit more blended in, perhaps, you know, that sort of thing. So it looks as though it's got the floor kind of coming through it a bit more. That might work. Do you know what I mean? So you can try different things. Or I might possibly bring the opacity back up if I wanted it to look like it was meant to be stuck on the floor. But then I could also go to my effect controls, color correction, and hue and saturation, and I might just desaturate it a bit, just take some of that kind of graphic-y sting out of it to make it a bit more kind of, if I desaturate it fully, it goes black and white, you see. So I can sort of bring that in to make it look a bit more like it's sort of like that, and we can perhaps change the hue of it slightly as well, so it's sort of, you know, yeah, looks a little bit more like it's lit by warm light or whatever. You see what I mean? So there's lots of different things that we can do to make it look like it's bedded in. But effectively, that's the principle behind this technique, first of all. Now, let's just say, though, that you want to add something else into your scene now. What do we do? Because obviously now we've lost all of our nodes. And if you click on the footage again, they don't come back. How do we get them back? Well, what you do is you just make sure you're in the effect controls for the original footage, and you just click on 3D camera tracker, and lo and behold, now we have our target back again. We can stick stuff to the ceiling, we can stick it to the wall, whatever it might be, you know, so I can go there. And now, because we've already created the camera, it doesn't say create solid in camera anymore, it just says create solid. So there's our new solid, so we can pre-comp that, and we can turn that into whatever we want. See, like a poster on the wall or whatever, and we're good to go. Okay, so that's the first of the 2 tutorials. Hope that's been useful. Join me in the second one, where we'll be creating a 3D space and doing something a bit more ambitious.